Okay, welcome to another author interviews at Crystal Lake. And today our guest is Jason Marc Harris, who's the author of Master of Rods and Strings. And I'm going to let him introduce himself. So take it away. Tell us who you are and what you write.
Hi, I'm Jason Harris, and I'm writer of the new novella coming out, Master of Rods and Strings. I enjoy writing, weird fiction, horror, supernatural. Also, teach literature, folklore, creative writing at Texas A&M, College Station, Texas, and have moved around a bit from West Coast California to Michigan, Oregon, Florida, now here in Texas. So made the rounds.
Well
So,
traveled.
yep.
So give everybody a quick overview of your new book, Masters of Rods and Strings.
So I will start just with the back synopsis here and maybe elaborate a little bit. So jealous of the attention lavished upon the puppetry talents of his dear sister and tormented by visions of her torture at the hands of the mysterious Uncle Pavan, who recruited her for his arcane school, Elias is determined to learn the true nature of occult puppetry, no matter the hideous costs, in order to exact vengeance. So vengeance is a key issue here, a sense of betrayal, ambition to perfect a craft. And I should just add that it's not just the attachment to his sister, but also his developing kind of rapport with his favorite puppet that matters quite a bit in the course of the book. His puppet's named, he names the puppet Virgil.
Okay, so what were your inspirations for the book? Do you have a interest in horror puppets?
Yes, there's sort of a range of things. I would say most directly is probably Thomas Ligotti's works. I had started reading a lot of his stories 15 years ago or so. Um, I'd also actually written an article about his use of clowns and puppet figures in his supernatural horror works. But also, I've been interested in puppets a long time, as well as the idea of forbidden knowledge. The Faust legend, also Lovecraft's Necronomicon, and the idea that there's things behind the superficial world that, as it were, pull the strings, and the different ways of thinking about puppets, not just merely as a puppeteer and an object, but the connections that's there. And there's certain myths and legends that also relate to how puppets may be, vessels of other things, having even a kind of sentience, may have an influence upon the puppeteer. And also, there was one horror comic from EC Horror Comics that's long since disappeared, and it was called The Ventriloquist Dummy. And an interesting thing that happens in that one is that the ventriloquist dummy, I guess I can just spoil it because it's turns out to be an outgrowth from the person's arm rather than a hand. It's sort of the evil twin motif, which actually has a greater power of will most of the time than the puppeteer. So that aspect of having more than one consciousness, or kind of a symbiotic consciousness, that also, I think, influenced some of the ways I was writing this book. And in terms of the storytelling, the kind of obsessive, exuberant megalomaniac that we encounter in stories like Poe's The Telltale Heart and The Vengeful Montrezor and Cask of Amontillado, in Perfume by Patrick Susskind, and Dostoevsky's Raskolnikov and Crime and Punishment. Characters who may have, they believe the best of intentions, at least at first, but become morally complicated by their ambition, their resentments, their attachments, and desire for vengeance and achievement of sometimes artistic ambition.
Yeah, you could probably add Phantom of the Opera to that list too with this.
Yes. Right. So very much all in that vein. Yes, it's good for horror. Those extremes.
Okay, and speaking of complicated characters, tell us about your main character. What is their personality? How do they or they presented in the book?
Yeah, so we see Elias first as a young child, and he grows to be an older teen by the end of the book. And he starts off as someone who's had a good friendship with his sister and has a relatively seemingly benign life in a rural area in France. Uh, but over time, he becomes jealous. He's very painfully lonely and alienated and obsessive because he sees achievement at puppetry as sort of a way out of his very sort of provincial life and a way to connect again with his sister, who has to go away to the advanced school of puppetry. Um, and so, as he learns more about what's sort of happening behind the scenes, not just with the craft of puppetry, but occult puppetry in particular, he becomes determined to sort of get hold of that power for himself, to understand it, and to wield it for vengeance as well as his own goals of achievement.
Okay, so what kind of an emotional journey does your character go through? What kind of fears and changes does he exhibit?
So he's definitely very anxious about the separation from his sister, but he's also jealous that she's been selected for this school and he has not. Um, his parents don't buy him a puppet, so he's very much left out, like not getting that PS5 or something, but more so than that, because he becomes very sort of linked up in his mind with the connection with puppets and learns to make them and to commune with something beyond there. So he feels also kind of entitled in a way, even when he's in anguish and resentful. He runs away from home in his frustration, desperation, and he, in some ways, becomes a bit ruthless in his pursuit of this knowledge, while still, aiming to reconnect with his sister and to punish those that he comes to believe have wronged her and his family. So those are some of the emotions. Oh, and he even has a brief romance, I should add, a complicated romance that.
Okay, so
Yeah.
tell us about your secondary characters. How do they fit in? Do they steal scenes, or are they just supporting the main character?
So to some degree has her own sort of path there, linked with her brother Elias's, and their uncle um, has sort of overshadowed their family. But in terms of some other sort of characters who are not directly in that main sort of stage, there's, for instance, there's a bullying character at the School of Advanced Puppetry named Desmond, who becomes a kind of a minor nemesis of Elias, and he's kind of, I suppose, somewhat entertaining in his put downs and bullying. And also, there's a mysterious doorman later on who has some secrets. Um, he sort of guards the entrance where people come to do a competition of occult puppetry later in the book. And so he has sort of an ironic dryness and confidence to him, as well as this air of mystery. I think he's an interesting character on the sidelines, but not as much of the sidelines as he seems, as it were. So,
Oh, I love those type of characters. So,
mhm.
what's your favorite scene in the book without spoilers?
Well, I do like the climatic scene, but that's too charged with spoilers. So I will reverse a little bit towards, there's a kind of a conference of puppeteers earlier are there for academic interest and just representing different cultures and approaches to being a puppeteer. It's set among ruins of Glanum, ancient Roman city, and there that's actually where Elias meets someone, has a romantic connection, but also there's a mysterious figure who appears wearing a plague mask who offers a particular challenge to Elias and his new romantic partner, where it becomes very complicated, and there's sort of a double revelation of what's going on, and betrayal as well. So it is, a lot happens at once that I think sort of ups the ante for Elias, that scene.
Well, that sounds intriguing. So, why did you decide to write in the horror genre?
So I think again part of it was influence of reading Ligotti, but also that for a long time, even as a child, puppets carried with them uh, an element of the mysterious, right? You see, as a child, you might accept, okay, well, that thing kind of moves around and talks on the Muppets or Sesame Street, Kermit the Frog. Okay, yeah, wait, is he really? And why is Gonzo's nose so long? And could it hurt you? Can Miss Piggy bite? And how are those other puppets sort of standing up back there and moving around? So I think that was part of it. That was in my imagination. I remember having some dreams that there was a tennis ball puppet sometimes people would have at elementary school, and in my dream it was actually sort of a horrific sort of a chief of sorts in this museum of horrors. So it was partly within my own sort of mind growing, but also from reading how other writers had handled the puppet figure. And it sort of, this sort of came out with the first sentence of the book, the voice of the character, that I will not deny that I've always been fascinated with puppets. And that character sort of took hold where, okay, this is the book that needs to get written here, and to hear more of this voice and have to really. And so the horror genre worked well because there's no necessary sort of barriers to expression. I feel, especially with the horror genre, that you don't have to. I would say put limits on psychological implications, the passions. That there's a kind of radical creativity that just it suited the story and sort of grew to sort of be under. I'd say more along the lines of sort of weird supernatural horror, since but many other kinds too.
Yeah. Yeah, horror doesn't have many limits. Sometimes you actually have to pull back sometimes with a story instead of actually hitting a limit. So what is what was the most enjoyable thing about writing in the horror genre and in this book particular?
So I would say it's that exploration of the unknown, of following the sort of the sinister logic of what happens when you are eaten up by ambition and vengeance, and that willingness, even appetite to know things that to others, where you don't go because angels fear to tread there, but the person possessed with this great desire and need will go there and enter the darkness with the demons or ghosts or whatever else is there. And so it was interesting. So the step by step progression, both psychologically and in terms of the these other elements of the narrative, sort of crossing the barriers from real, uncanny, ever more sort of supernatural, disturbing, disconcerting elements, impact on character, as well as of spectacle in there.
Okay, so what was the hardest part of writing the book and writing horror fiction?
So I think it does go back a bit to the issue of, are there barriers? Are there not? How much do you actually reveal and when? Um, I like the idea of trying to, appeal to the imagination as much as possible. So not necessarily revealing everything, and especially too soon. Um, so I think a lot of the atmosphere of horror kind of works within sort of the shadows, the half glimpsed, the growing, dawning, realization of things, can often be more evocative, than something clearly laid out on the dissection table necessarily. Um, so there's a pace there that also is going to vary by readers' taste. Some people like things really fast paced, others a slow burn. There's a medium range. So I suppose finding the balance is difficult at times, though I just largely let the story unfold the way it felt it needed to, and then revised a shorter version, and then kept getting longer. But then realized it seemed best as a concentrating the time and place more in much of it, as opposed to there was a earlier draft when he ends up over in some near some cranberry bogs in Wisconsin. Now it's all in France. So yeah, a little more concentration of setting, I think, with a novella that worked well for this. But at times, what was a challenge because just all so many ideas go into your head about what you might do. Um, and then I'm aware that there are definitely some taboo elements of it that can be not just maybe shocking to some readers. I think most horror readers not easily shocked in terms of what they've read, but that maybe they're assumptions that might be a kind of preloaded ideas when treating taboo subjects about what something means. Um, and in this context, when some of these taboos are dealt with, it has a very specific meaning for what Elias is doing with his pursuit of excellence, superlative excellence in occult puppetry, and the way that a sorcerer of this branch of esotericism would gain power. But he's also ambivalent, so it's not a simple path for him. He's often tortured by different feelings at once. Messy emotional territory that had to sort of revise several times to try to get, or more than several times, but to try to get the right feelings to hopefully manifest and come across at those sort of key scenes.
Yeah, that can be tricky.
Mhm.
So, who are some of your favorite authors?
So there's a wide range there, and some favorites feel like they're favorites because you read them earlier in life. Everything from the Thornton Burgess animal stories, Reddy Fox, Peter Rabbit, and so forth, and myths and fables. But also, I was a fan of Lord of the Rings, The Stranger, Albert Camus. Uh, some of the Russian writers had a big impact. I like a lot of the sort of wild, exuberant, weird stuff like Nikolai Gogol. Um, Flann O'Brien, out of the early 20th century of Ireland, has this kind of fantastic, humorous, bizarre style I enjoyed. Shirley Jackson's works, and more people who are still alive. Certainly, Thomas Ligotti, and I've been reading Gemma Files. Currently looking at Alan Moore's Providence. So definitely Lovecraft was a writer enjoyed that I came to pretty early, like in junior high, and trying to think some others I'd catch. Oh, I'm also reading The Changeling by Victor Laval. I had read his Black Tom before. Making sure I finished The Changeling before watching the the miniseries. Always important, I think, to read first, but there's an adaptation. So there's some of them that I've enjoyed quite a bit. Sheridan Le Fanu, M.R. James, a lot of the earlier 19th century, early 20th century horror ghost story writers, Arthur Machen, and I'm always never sure is it Macon or Mackin, but Arthur, it's one of the two. Some people correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes we just don't quite know how to pronounce that author
Yes,
name.
yes.
It's my
But
name our love.
I very much enjoyed his visions of fairies as much darker entities, closer to some of the more disturbing folklore than the Disneyland treatment.
Yeah, fairies are more fun when they're dark.
Yes. Algernon Blackwood also. So those are some that have been fun to read, interesting to read.
Okay, so what do you like to do when you're not writing? Do you have any hobbies or hidden talents?
I used to be sort of okay at playing the piano, but I'm very out of practice these days. But still, now and then, move the keys around a bit. when opportunity presents, definitely like uh, hiking, being outdoors. So those are some things. Lately, it's been more about sort of catching up on viewing of various series and well, I mean, reading and writing is a given, right? So
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah, I know the feeling, but catching up in series, I have a very long list of that
yes.
myself.
So when your mind is quite exhausted at the end of the day, just relax and
Yeah.
yes.
Okay. So, have you written anything else besides Masters of Rods and Strings?
I've got a collection of short stories ready for submission places, and a novel also, but they're not published, so I'm seeking representation if possible there. But I have a folklore uh, sort of a literary criticism book called Folklore and the Fantastic in 19th century British fiction. And then I did a couple of collaborations with someone called Burke Duncan that I knew at University of Washington, who also now does some puppeteering himself, actually, and then some filmmaking. And we wrote together the Troll Tale and other gathering a lot of people's folk tales in the Pacific Northwest, and then Laugh Without Guilt, which was gathering so-called clean jokes, and yeah, those and the Master Rods and Strings and the are the main are the book publications. Um,
Okay.
yeah.
So you mentioned you have a couple of things that you're trying to sub out. So can you give us a little teaser on those? So
Oh, okay. So the novel deals with it. This is a near future book dealing with a planned community in Seattle, and it just goes terribly wrong in various ways. Enlisting someone who's sort of one of these, eventually becomes compromised by the monetary support from this kind of technocrat, and then there's people living in a compound in Southern California in the desert who become convinced that this group represents a threat to their way of life in the future, and so they come into conflict. And then meanwhile, some of the technology being used pretty much opens a kind of gate to hell, more or less. So various complications that ensue in the process of the planned utopia. But it was a lot of fun.
yeah.
It's kind of a satire in some ways too, but also has a serious side of yeah.
Yeah.
And the main character, she actually is trying to find meaning and something resembling pleasure in life by turning to this planned community. Um, so it's also a struggle to what do you do when you feel numbed by how things are, frustrated by the country or the state or the community you inhabit, and trying to sort of remake the world and the dangers that can happen with that. So
Yeah. It sounds a little timely these days too. So
yes, there's that. Um, yep.
it does sound very interesting. And your short story collection?
So there's a range of topics there, but certainly some are it makes use of the supernatural. I have a piece, for instance, on Slender Man. I have a piece there dealing with sleep paralysis based on the Hmong traditions around that, um, which are very interesting to work with. And somebody who discovers that yes, it is more than just a auditory visual hallucination, and how to handle that, but also how to eventually wield it as a kind of weapon against a neighbor he despises. So on the one hand, it's struggling with the American dream and frustrations of having immigrated, and it's also dealing with the supernatural in what's a universal experience of so-called hag-ridden or some nightmare that people all over the world experience one way or another. I had it once only because I had taken a medication when my wisdom teeth were out. At least that's what I tell myself, right? Because
Hmm.
when the voice said, "We have been waiting a long time until you were weak," I later, when I shrugged it all off, checked the medication. It said may cause auditory hallucinations. But of course, somebody else could speculate, well, maybe what the medicine did is it shut down the part of your brain that offers you a kind of psychic defense. So,
Yeah.
yes, there's always been so
Yeah.
many things.
Yeah, it's interesting that a lot of those auditory hallucinations are never nice ones. They're always something.
Yes, that's funny. But my dad used to say that. He said that why is it whenever it feels like you feel like a spiritual presence in the room at night, it's always a sinister one, like
Yeah,
a
it's like
comforting one. Yes,
yeah, it's never like your nice Aunt Louise come back for a chat and a cup of tea or something.
right, right. Uh,
Okay, so on that note, I think we'll wrap up the interview. And why don't you tell viewers where they can find you and your new book?
okay, and I should mention I'm also working on a sequel to this book that'll explore further adventures of Elias's journey and consequences of this one.
Mm, cool.
So, well, thank you very much. Appreciate it a lot.
Okay, and thanks for being the guest today. And that's it for this episode. And bye for now.
Great, bye.